My name is Avita Jordan, and before anyone ever knew my name, I was just a quiet girl inside a travel company that had been bleeding money for years watching creditors circle like vultures, watching employees leave one by one, watching hope fade. From every corner of the office, while my father focused on appearances and my sister lived as if life owed her everything I chose. A different path. I stayed silent, I stayed late, I studied every system, every broken process, every failed strategy. I taught myself software engineering, coding algorithms, system architecture, airline and hotel integrations, dynamic pricing, automation, fraud detection, security, and scalability. I spent nights on cold office floors with only the glow of a monitor. For company, I survived on coffee exhaustion and stubborn belief that I could save what everyone else had given up on. I failed thousands of times. I rewrote code that would not work. I debugged systems that refused to cooperate. I learned patience. In a way that hurt, I learned strategy in a way that cost me sleep and health, and slowly, everything began to change. The bookings stabilized, the partners returned, the employees began to believe again. The system I had built became a machine of efficiency and profit, and within 1 year, the same company that everyone had written off generated $400 million in pure profit. And yet, no one called my name. The media wrote articles about leadership, about luck, about miracles. My father praised my sister in public as if the work was hers, and I stayed quiet because I knew recognition was not what I wanted, at least not yet. Then came my sister's birthday, a day filled with music, laughter, family, and executives applauding. And smiling, my father stood in the center of it all, raised his glass, and announced that the entire company was a gift for her. Ownership, control, everything. My chest tightened. My mind raced for a moment. I thought he was joking, but when I calmly asked, "What about me?" he laughed loud and cruel, reached into his pocket, pulled out a single $100 bill, placed it in my hand, and said, "This is your real value." The room erupted in laughter. Employees and relatives smiled awkwardly, and I felt something inside me break, and yet my face remained calm. I walked out silently through the gardens into the night, carrying only the dignity I had left and the $100 reminder of how little I meant to them. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not beg. I packed a small bag and slept for 2 hours because exhaustion always wins. And then I woke before dawn and made a decision that would change everything. I went to a small cafe far from the city where I could think without interruption. I drank black coffee and stared at my reflection in the window, wondering who I had become. I realized that in the silence, in the nights of coding, in the sacrifices I had made, I had built not only a company, but a power they would never understand. And that morning, as my father and sister walked into the office, expecting smooth operations, reports, and profits to flow, they had no idea that the girl they had dismissed, the girl they had underestimated, was gone. But not gone completely, because the system she built ran exactly as she designed it until she decided it would not run for them anymore. And as panic spread across the office, calls were made, emails sent, employees scrambled, partners questioned everything, and the cracks began to show. It was beautiful in its own cruel way, seeing them struggle without the knowledge and skill that had saved them. And I sat miles away, calm, focused, ready to choose myself finally, and the world continued, unaware that the quiet girl who no one noticed had been the one holding everything together that entire year. And in that moment I realized I had finally stepped into my own power. The kind that did not need approval or applause. And with the sunrise spilling through the cafe window, I made plans that would not only reclaim what was taken from me, but redefine what they thought was possible. And I smiled because for the first time I felt free, truly free, to build my empire without anyone standing in my way. And this was only the beginning of the story that they would never see coming. As the sun rose, I watched the city wake from my small apartment. High above the streets, my fingers drummed on the table and my mind raced through every line of code, every algorithm, every system I had built. The travel company was still running because of me, but without my presence, it would soon crumble. I had seen the panic in my employees' eyes, heard confused voices on the phone with partners, and knew that my absence had shaken their world, I sipped my coffee and began to plan my next moves, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, out of understanding that the world had underestimated me for far too long. I spent the morning reviewing every process in the system, every server, every link between supplier and customer, every line of code I had written over endless nights of sacrifice. It was a feeling of power and fear intertwined, knowing that while they thought they owned the company, I was the one who controlled it invisibly. I made calls to secure personal investments, to expand my own resources without anyone noticing me, the calm in my voice betrayed nothing of the storm that was building within. I reached out to a few trusted old partners who had always respected my abilities, quietly setting up contracts that would put me in complete control if I ever chose to step back. In their eyes, it was just business as usual. In reality, it was the foundation of a plan that would reclaim not just respect, but my rightful place as the one who had saved the company. I spent hours writing code to implement backdoor reports, alerts, and monitoring systems that would inform me of everything happening in the office, from employee actions to financial transactions. I wanted to understand every movement, every decision, without being noticed, because knowledge was power and secrecy was survival. Then I began to draft a new software interface, a platform even more advanced than the one I had already built, one that could replace human errors with automated intelligence, that could predict market changes, adapt pricing instantly, and manage bookings globally without oversight. I smiled at the thought of them thinking they were in control, when in reality, the system was my silent army working for me. Alone, I spent nights testing modules, simulating failures, creating contingencies for every scenario. I imagined the panic if a server went down or if a partner noticed something unexpected. I wrote code to protect the company from disasters that even my father could not foresee, while simultaneously creating opportunities for me to leverage ownership in ways they had never imagined. I thought about my sister, her carefree attitude, her laughter at parties, her ignorance of the work I had done. I remembered the way she avoided my eyes that night when my father gave her everything, and I made a promise, silently, that one day she would understand the difference between luck and earned skill. I wrote another set of algorithms to track every single financial transaction internally and externally, so that if needed, I could prove beyond doubt who had built the value, who had created the profit, and who had carried the company from ruins to glory. I moved quietly in my apartment like a shadow, preparing for a return that they would never see coming. Every line of code was a weapon, every server a fortress, every partner a silent ally. I spent hours visualizing how I would enter the office, the looks on faces, the shock of realization, the power of truth, and I smiled because for the first time I understood the real meaning of control. It was not in the title or the applause, it was in knowledge, execution, and foresight. I took breaks only to walk through the city streets, observing life, observing people, observing how the world underestimated determination, how it ignored quiet strength, how invisible work often carried the weight of empires. And I realized my life had been a series of invisible victories, invisible sacrifices, invisible intelligence that no one acknowledged. But now all of that invisibility had become my weapon and my shield. I began to draft emails and messages to long-lost allies, investors, and innovators who had respected my work, silently planting seeds that would grow into an ecosystem that no one could manipulate without me. I contacted a few technology partners, suggesting collaborations that, in reality, were carefully constructed traps that would ensure I maintained leverage over critical parts of the business. Without their knowledge, I checked the system. I built and realized the beauty of its autonomy. It could run for weeks without intervention, yet it would feed me every detail, everything happening within those walls, and with that knowledge I felt unstoppable. I imagined walking into the office, calmly sipping coffee while chaos and confusion unfolded. Like a movie around those who had doubted me, I imagined the looks on my father's face, the flicker of fear when he realized that control was never his, and I allowed myself a small smile. because I finally understood that power belonged to the one who built it, not the one who inherited it. Then I began to think about the next phase 2 of my plan to reclaim not just my place in the company, but to expand beyond it, to create ventures and opportunities that could never be taken. A way to build a legacy of my own making that would not depend on family approval or recognition. I wrote notes and lists of business ideas, investments, partnerships, and technologies that could be leveraged to build a personal empire. One that even my father and sister would eventually recognize as unstoppable. I watched videos, tutorials, articles, anything that could sharpen my mind. My instincts, my understanding of markets and technology. I built contingency plans for every possible threat. Every scenario in which they could attempt to block me, I ran simulations in my head and on my computers, imagining every outcome, every move they could make, and how I would respond with precision and silence. Then came night, and I continued coding for hours. The apartment, filled with screens and coffee cups and the quiet hum of servers and my own heartbeat, I was alone yet completely in control of the world I had created. I felt alive in a way I never had when I was chasing approval, because now I understood that approval was irrelevant. What mattered was execution, discipline, and preparation. When I finally looked up, it was past midnight. The city lights glimmered below like stars scattered across a dark sky, and I realized that in the coming days, everything would change. I was ready to step out of the shadows to claim not vengeance but recognition. Not for money, but for respect. For the years I had poured into something everyone else took for granted, I knew the company would never run the same without me. Even though it appeared to run perfectly, I had built triggers, systems, alerts, and algorithms that could subtly sabotage or redirect operations if necessary, not to destroy, but to remind them that invisible work carried weight that had been ignored for too long. I smiled and leaned back in my chair, knowing the morning would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new ways to demonstrate my value, and finally, the world would see that Avita Jordan was not just the overlooked daughter, the quiet worker, or the girl who received $100. She was a force, a mind, a creator, a strategist, and nothing would ever be the same again. And as I shut down my computers and walked to the window looking out at the dark city below, I felt an unfamiliar, calm joy and excitement for the first time in my life, because I realized that the game had only just begun, and this time I was the one holding all the pieces in my hands. As dawn broke, I watched the city below awaken, unaware of the silent storm that was about to change everything. My apartment felt like a command center. Each screen, each server, each line of code, a weapon, a tool, a key to power that they had never understood. I began the day by mapping every employee, every manager, every partner, and every system that depended on me. My mind raced with possibilities and contingencies. Each scenario more precise than the last. I had created the perfect balance of invisibility and control, a structure so intricate that no one could function without my oversight, even if they thought they were in charge. I drafted more algorithms, more monitoring systems, more alerts feeding information directly to me, so I could anticipate every move, every decision, every mistake before it happened. I smiled because for the first time I realized that invisibility was more powerful than recognition, and knowledge was more valuable than ownership. Then I contacted a few trusted old partners, not revealing my presence, but subtly guiding decisions so that they aligned with my strategy. Quietly setting traps and opportunities that would ensure leverage in the future. The thrill of control coursed through me as I imagined the look on my father and sister's faces when they realized they had been playing in a world I had constructed without them. I built simulations of market scenarios, each one predicting responses from competitors, from partners, from customers, and designed contingency codes to optimize profits. No matter what they did, it was a dance of numbers, algorithms, and logic that they could not see. I spent hours deep in these calculations, testing, retesting, and perfecting until each scenario was bulletproof. Then I turned my attention to expanding my influence. Beyond the company creating networks and alliances that would put me in a position of undeniable power in every sector I cared about: technology, finance, partnerships, logistics, everything. I reached out through anonymous channels, setting up collaborations that appeared casual but were carefully structured to benefit me alone. I reviewed financial flows, tracing every dollar that moved through the company, ensuring that no transaction could bypass my monitoring systems. My eyes scanned spreadsheets, screens, dashboards, and alerts, constantly analyzing patterns, anomalies, behaviors, learning from every interaction, every error, every success. It was intoxicating and empowering. I felt alive in a way that my previous life of quiet effort never allowed. I began drafting proposals for side ventures, new travel technologies, personalized booking systems, predictive analytics that could operate independently but integrate seamlessly, giving me both profit and leverage in ways my father had never imagined. Each line of code was a silent declaration of power, each contract a building block of my future empire. Then I paused and thought about my sister, about the party, the laughter, the gift, the humiliation, and I felt a wave of clarity. Not revenge, but justice clarity that came from knowing my worth, that came from knowing the blood, sweat, and nights I'd poured into creating something she could only inherit without effort I spent. The afternoon designing algorithms that would subtly highlight my contribution internally without alerting them directly, a way to force recognition through the undeniable logic of data, through the metrics, the profits, the automated systems they depended on. I was building proof of my genius invisibly and systematically. The elegance of it thrilled me. The precision, the inevitability, the control. It was like conducting an orchestra where I alone knew every note, every pause, every crescendo. Then I created a personal dashboard, tracking every aspect of the company in real-time: employee productivity, partner engagement, financial flows, operational efficiency. Every anomaly highlighted instantly to me. It was the ultimate map of power, the ultimate understanding of influence without them ever knowing. I watched the office from afar, employees bustling, confused, partners calling, asking questions, managers scrambling, trying to interpret alerts and emails. None of it seemed alarming because the systems ran perfectly, yet every subtle inefficiency, every mistake amplified my leverage over the operations. It beautiful. In a cruel and calculated way, I drafted communications to old mentors, investors, advisors, suggesting collaborations, ideas, ventures, all disguised as casual advice, but each carefully engineered to ensure that when the time came, I could step forward without challenge, each word chosen precisely for maximum effect. I spent the evening analyzing market trends, competitor moves, social analytics, technological innovations, reading every report and studying every pattern to integrate into my designs to anticipate opportunities before they appeared. I imagined the surprise when I would reveal my position, when I would step into the room and quietly yet unmistakably assert the truth of my value. I felt a thrill at the thought of it, a calm, controlled excitement that surged through me, energizing every cell in my body. The world had ignored me for too long, and now I would show them the quiet power of someone they had dismissed, someone they had undervalued, someone who had built the empire from the ground up while they took credit without awareness. Then night fell, and I continued coding, writing, testing, perfecting the algorithms, the alerts, the dashboards, the contingency plans, until my apartment glowed with the light of screens and the hum of servers, and I felt unstoppable. Every decision, every failure, every success had been documented, analyzed, optimized, and integrated into my systems. I leaned back and imagined the morning, the moment I would begin phase 2, entering the office, invisibly controlling without being seen, manipulating through algorithms, not confrontation, watching their confusion as they realized the girl they mocked, the girl they handed $100 to, had been the force behind everything all along. And as I stared out at the twinkling city lights, I felt an unfamiliar, calm joy and a fierce determination, because I knew that by the end of this game, nothing would ever be the same, and the story of Avita Jordan was only just B. The morning arrived crisp and quiet. I sat in my apartment watching the city below, unaware that the world was about to shift under the influence of decisions they would never understand. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the alerts and dashboards. I had designed to monitor the company, every transaction, every employee. Action, every partner communication flowed through my system and into my control. It was a symphony of information. A network of influence that allowed me to understand everything without anyone knowing. I sipped my coffee and smiled because for the first time I realized the power of invisible authority. The quiet control that came from knowledge and execution, and I began to plan. The next move, step by step, not in haste, but in precision. Phase 3 of my strategy involved creating subtle disruptions to test the responsiveness of the employees, managers, and partners. I wanted to see who could handle pressure, who would crumble, who would make mistakes, and I began by sending out small anomalies through the system, random alerts, fake discrepancies that looked real enough to trigger concern but harmless enough to observe reactions. I watched as employees scrambled, tried to resolve issues, called each other, searched for answers, and I noted every hesitation, every incorrect decision, every sign of incompetence. It was fascinating, the dance of humans under pressure while the automated systems ran flawlessly in the background. It was almost poetic, yet terrifying to realize how much they depended on the invisible work of one person. And I took notes, documented patterns, categorized behaviors, predicting future mistakes before they occurred. Then I shifted attention to external partners. A few key suppliers were contacted under the guise of technical queries, and I watched as they adapted to the data I provided, noticing how quickly they could adjust when prompted, carefully manipulating information to strengthen my leverage, subtly ensuring that my influence extended beyond the walls of the office into the ecosystem that supported the business. I reviewed financial flows, analyzed profitability reports, and identified inefficiencies that had gone unnoticed for months, if not years. Each anomaly became an opportunity to reassert control, to highlight my value silently. Through metrics and outcomes without confrontation, it was the art of strategy in its purest form. Then IT worked on the messaging. My communications with mentors, advisors, partners were crafted with meticulous care, every word chosen to provoke a reaction favorable to my long-term objectives while appearing casual and insignificant to anyone reading without knowledge of my intent. Every conversation was a chess move, every suggestion a setup for leverage. Later in the game, I spent hours analyzing competitor actions and market trends, simulating responses in my head. Night descended, and the glow of my screens lit the apartment like a quiet battlefield. I continued coding, testing, reviewing, simulating scenarios. Phase 4 of my strategy involved implementing the final safeguards and redundancies into the systems, ensuring that no matter what actions my father, sister, or employees took, the company would remain under my invisible control. I refined alerts, dashboards, automated reporting, and anomaly detection, feeding everything directly into my own monitoring system while making it appear to the world as though the company was functioning perfectly on its own. I reviewed the responses from the employees, the hesitations, the miscommunications, the subtle errors, and cataloged every weakness, every point of dependence. I knew that even without my physical presence, I controlled the flow of operations, that every decision made was influenced by the systems I had designed, and it was exhilarating to realize the depth of my power. I began reaching out to potential allies, investors, technology partners, and innovators, sending messages that seemed casual, ordinary, but were carefully crafted to align future opportunities with my personal strategic goals. Every word a calculated move, every sentence a building block toward leverage and influence. I reviewed market data, competitor activity, customer behavior, and financial trends, adjusting algorithms in real time, predicting outcomes, and optimizing responses, creating a perfect loop of control and insight. While everyone else believed the company was simply running smoothly, I watched as subtle glitches I had implemented revealed inefficiencies and dependency, further proving my indispensability. I spent hours cross-referencing data, linking Outcomes to actions tracing every transaction and every operational decision back to its origin, and silently celebrating the truth that without me, the systems might appear stable, but they were fragile. My presence invisible, yet essential, I thought. About my sister and father, again their ignorance. My humiliation at receiving $100 and the way they had laughed at my worth fueled my determination, not with hatred, but with clarity, understanding that value was not given, it was proven, and mine was undeniable through the systems, the knowledge and the meticulous control I held in my hands. Then I drafted a strategic plan for personal expansion beyond the company new ventures. Technology, investments, global partnerships, each designed to create independence, leverage, and security in a world that had once dismissed me, every line written, a step toward building a legacy that could not be inherited or stolen. I spent the night coding, automating, preparing contingency plans for every eventuality, imagining the surprise, the shock, the inevitable recognition when the truth of my contribution became undeniable even. Revealed silently through metrics, through outcomes, through the undeniable logic of data, I visualized the day I would return to the office, calmly sipping coffee, while the ripple of realization spread across the faces of those who had underestimated me, my father, my sister, my colleagues, everyone who had laughed, everyone who had ignored every detail. I smiled at the thought because finally, Avita Jordan, to be seen not for her title or inheritance, but for the skill, determination, and intellect that had created a company from ruins to a multi-million-dollar empire. And as the night stretched on the city lights shimmering below, I felt a quiet joy, a fierce determination, and the calm knowledge that the story of my rise was far from over, that the next morning would mark another step in a game only I could truly play, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning arrived quiet and tense, the city below unaware that the culmination of months of planning and invisible work was about to unfold. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop, reviewing alerts, dashboards, and monitoring systems one last time. Every employee, every partner, every process tracked, analyzed, documented. Nothing escaped my attention. I smiled, knowing that the power I held was absolute, yet invisible. Phase 5 involved stepping out of the shadows, carefully, gradually revealing enough to assert undeniable control without confrontation or chaos. I began by sending precise reports to key investors under the guise of routine updates, highlighting exceptional performance and subtly crediting the systems and processes I had designed. The responses were predictable: admiration, surprise, disbelief. My influence extended beyond the office, now touching every corner of the business ecosystem. I watched as the employees struggled to respond to new instructions generated by automated systems they did not fully understand. Managers double-checked decisions, partners adapted to changes with confusion and anxiety. My sister arrived at the office, radiant, oblivious to the storm I had orchestrated. She smiled at colleagues, greeted employees, laughed at trivial jokes, unaware that her empire rested entirely on the foundation I had built. I imagined the moment her eyes would meet mine, and the realization would dawn slowly and painfully that the world she had inherited was constructed by my hands and sustained by my intellect and foresight, while she believed it hers. By luck, I began to implement subtle adjustments to the systems, routing critical alerts through pathways that highlighted my contribution without exposing my presence. In doing so, I created undeniable evidence that the value of the company was directly linked to my work. Every operation, every successful transaction, every profit increase traced silently to the algorithms and processes I had engineered. I watched as confusion began to creep into the office, employees calling one another, questioning assumptions, trying to trace anomalies to sources, while the dashboards and systems I had designed guided every outcome invisibly. It was an intricate dance of power and control executed flawlessly, and I felt exhilarated yet calm in the knowledge that nothing could undo the influence I had built, then I contacted a select group of investors, mentors, and technology partners, sending messages that appeared casual, ordinary, but were carefully designed to secure further opportunities and leverage. For myself, establishing channels of influence and preparation for ventures beyond the company boundaries. I spent hours reviewing financial trends, market behaviors, competitor analysis, and customer patterns, integrating each insight into my systems, further strengthening my ability to anticipate outcomes and control responses in real time. The company operated perfectly, yet my invisible presence ensured that any deviation would be managed according to my plan. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection, thinking about the night. My father handed my sister everything and gave me $100. The humiliation, the shock, the laughter, the disbelief, and how it had fueled a quiet storm of determination and strategy that no one had ever anticipated. I realized that power was never about titles or applause. It was about knowledge, execution, and foresight. And I had built more than a company. I had built a legacy, an empire, an invisible force that no one could challenge without my consent. I drafted plans for new ventures, international collaborations, advanced technology platforms, predictive analytics, personalized travel experiences, all designed to secure my independence and extend my influence far beyond the company that had once rejected me. I coded new algorithms, tested new systems, automated processes that could run independently yet integrate seamlessly into existing operations, ensuring both profitability and leverage. I imagined walking into the office one day, fully visible, calmly sipping coffee, while employees, managers, partners, and even my father realized that the quiet, overlooked girl who had received $100 was the architect of their fortune, the mastermind behind every successful transaction, the force behind the empire. And I smiled at the thought, because the revelation would be undeniable through data, through systems, through outcomes, yet executed with such subtlety that no one could challenge it. I spent the night preparing detailed dashboards, presenting evidence of every process, every optimization, every decision point, proving in cold logic and irrefutable metrics that I had created value beyond measure, that I had saved the company, that I had made it profitable and sustainable. The story of Avita Jordan was reaching its climax, and the final chapter of the journey was about to begin. The sun rose again, painting the city in gold, and as I packed my laptop and prepared to step into the world outside, I felt a sense of calm, joy, and fierce determination. For the first time, I understood that recognition would come, not because anyone decided to give it to me, but because it would be inevitable and undeniable, because the systems I had built, the intelligence I had created, the knowledge I had accumulated could not be ignored. The employees would see it, partners would see it, the market would see it, even my father would see it, and it would all trace back to me silently, relentlessly, perfectly. I walked out of my apartment into the streets, feeling unstoppable, feeling free, and knowing that the quiet girl who had been overlooked, underestimated, and humiliated had become a force no one could ever ignore. And as I approached the office that morning, every step felt like a statement, a declaration of skill, intellect, and power. And as the doors opened, the world inside froze in subtle anticipation. Confusion and awe would ripple through the office. The employees, the managers, the partners, the very fabric of the company would recognize without words who had truly built it. And I finally smiled, because Avita Jordan had not just survived, she had triumphed. And this was the moment where her story would be remembered, where the invisible architect became visible and unstoppable, and nothing would ever be the same again. And as I looked across the office at the familiar faces, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had doubted, the ones who had dismissed me, I understood that victory had been silent for months. And now it was time for it to be seen and felt, and the company, the empire, the legacy was mine in truth and in execution. And the story of Avita Jordan ended not with a cry or confrontation, but with calm control, mastery, and undeniable recognition, and the world would never forget her name.